Patents filed by motorcycle companies can often be a glimpse of future bikes and the next generation of performance and safety technology. But at the same time, many of them are just speculative filings to protect intellectual property and have very little chance of making their way onto a production machine. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at 9 of the most exciting potential developments of 2020 so far, and I'll let you know how likely I think they are to come to fruition. But before we get started, if you're new around these parts and you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news as well as reviews and vlogs, then please do remember to hit subscribe. We're all pretty familiar with crumple zones. Typically located in the front, they're designed to deform in order to absorb some of the force of a collision, protecting the driver and passengers in the process. Pretty much every other type of vehicle uses them apart from motorcycles. When a bike hits something head-on, the front wheel is often pushed to the side and the rider takes a heavy share of the impact. BMW's patent shows a design that uses a V-shaped retainer behind the front wheel that would hold it in place if it were to be forced back. That would keep the front wheel and forks between the rider and the object they collided with, presumably absorbing some of the force. It's certainly an interesting idea, but it still feels like a long shot to me. Whether you hit something with the wheel in front of you or not, it's going to be messy. Personally, I think it's more likely that we'll see motorcycle manufacturers investing in technologies to prevent accidents occurring at all, like radar-assisted adaptive cruise control, which companies like Ducati and KTM are already believed to be working on. Three-wheeled motorcycles aren't a new thing. You've got your trikes, Can-Am Spyders, Piaggio MP3s, and most recently the Yamaha Nikon, to name but a few. But there could be a new player in town, with Kawasaki filing a patent for a three-wheeler at the end of last year. Their take is a little different to the Nikon, which has 2 pairs of forks, instead using a set of horizontal links that allow the wheels to tilt and pivot in alignment. Suspension is taken care of by a monoshock, whilst the steering uses a pair of rods to connect the bars to the wheels. Kawasaki claim that this is a simple structure that's both lighter and more efficient than a pair of forks. It doesn't look that simple to me, so I'll have to take their word for it. The Nikon seems to have been pretty well received since it was launched back in 2018, so there's a chance that Kawasaki could follow up with their own take. And they also released a video for their J-Concept electric three-wheeler a couple of years back, so perhaps the patent is a move towards putting it into production. But overall, I still think it's unlikely. Three-wheelers are a niche market and presumably expensive to develop. Ducati's €100,000 Superleggera V4 is currently the only production motorcycle to use a carbon fiber frame, but Yamaha could be looking to change that and to take it to the next level by incorporating self-detecting damage technology. They recently filed a patent for a carbon frame which was shown in the illustrations fitted to their FJR 1300 Sports Tourer. Despite increasing stiffness and reducing weight, carbon can suffer from cracks if it's impacted, such as the bike going over on its stand, which can then make it unsafe to use. As such, the patent outlines a few ideas for damage detection, as the fractures can be hard to see or occur inside the frame. One is to weave a fine electric cable into the carbon, which is weaker than the fibers around it and therefore will break if impacted, and send an alert to the control unit. The control unit can then notify the rider before they have a potentially dangerous crack develop in their frame. They also discuss using fiber optic to change the colour of parts of the frame that have been impacted so that the damage is easier to locate, or as a cheaper alternative using a paint that changes colour when impacted. These are all super interesting ideas to me, but carbon frames seem unlikely to make it into the mainstream anytime soon, owing to their expense. Carbon bicycles are often inspected for damage after an accident using ultrasound, so if you ever do slide your Superleggera down the road, perhaps it could be inspected with ultrasound anyway. The arrival of stricter Euro 5 emissions regulations at the beginning of this year forced manufacturers to update their models with cleaner running engines and exhaust systems, and it looks like Suzuki are still working through the changes with a patent for an update to the 250cc parallel twin used on the GSX 250R and the 250 V-Strom. It seems as though they've gone for an approach that causes the least disruption to the design of the rest of the bike, simply merging the headers into an extra catalytic converter, then splitting them back out again and into the existing cat. The new cat's close proximity to the exhaust ports ought to mean that it'll reach operating temperature quicker, which is a key requirement of Euro 5. This isn't, however, the first time we've seen twin cats. The Triumph Street Triple RS, for example, launched last year and uses two, and Triumph claimed that this approach helped them to meet emission standards whilst keeping the exhaust system relatively free-flowing, which helps both power and the sound. So it seems pretty likely that Suzuki will deploy this one soon. Kawasaki bought a 49.9% share in Bimota last year, and one of the first projects they released was the concept bike called the Tessie H2. It was essentially their supercharged H2 sports bike, but with a Bimota Tessie front end which uses a swing arm rather than conventional forks. And now Kawasaki appear to be developing their own simpler take on the front swing arm, judging by a recently filed patent. Their proposed system uses 4 parallel links to connect the swing arm to the frame, and then a rocker system to a transverse mounted monoshock. The hub-centered steering is then controlled by a relatively straightforward system compared to the complex set of linkages and rods used on the Bimota, with a traditional steering head and a vertical wishbone linkage. A front swing arm ought to improve the handling of the bike by transmitting braking forces to the frame rather than into a fork. This means that there's no dive under braking, which then means that the steering geometry is unaffected, and also the front monoshock is free to deal with suspension duties to its full capacity. But in the patent, Kawasaki also cite cost saving as a motivation for this design. Forks have relatively complex internals, and they also require a substantial frame design to cope with the braking forces which are transferred to the steering head. Kawasaki's frame in the patent is minimal, which ought to save on weight and production costs, and they claim that it would be suitable for a wide range of bikes, so simply swapping out the handlebar and seat combinations for different styles of riding would help save on development costs. On the one hand, buying Bimota suggests that Kawasaki are pretty serious about this, as they've been building up knowledge about front swing arms for a while. But on the other, it's hard to see conventional forks disappearing anytime soon. The 1049cc parallel twin engine in the new Africa Twin is excellent. I borrowed one from Honda for a few weeks and it was one of my favourite things about the bike. So it'd be a shame if Honda didn't deploy it to more models, and it looks like that might be the case at some point soon, with recent patents showing 2 new frame designs to fit around it. One is a steel cradle style frame that would be most suited to a retro bike, whilst the other is a sportier looking trellis with an aluminium section for the swing arm pivot. It wouldn't be unheard of for a manufacturer to repurpose a motor in another style of bike. Take the Yamaha Tenere 700 as a recent example, which uses the parallel twin from the MT-07. It's an efficient way to spin out more bikes without having to plough money into developing engines. But on the other, where would a bike like this fit into Honda's range? They already have the CB1000R and the CB1100 RS, so is another naked bike of a similar capacity really viable? Perhaps given that both of those bikes are inline 4s, they could be looking to complement them with a twin. But either way, a naked road-orientated Africa Twin is a bike I would love to ride. Many modern performance motorcycles have a lot of valve overlap. That's when the intake valve opens to let air and fuel into the combustion chamber before the exhaust valve is actually closed. It maximizes the amount of time for both exhaust gases to escape and for fresh fuel and air to be sucked in. But as you can imagine, some fuel can escape through the exhaust valve before it's been ignited, and this isn't great from an emissions perspective where the cleanest burn possible is key. Car manufacturers are increasingly using direct fuel injection to the point where most modern cars now have it. The injector is located inside the combustion chamber and sprays fuel in just after the exhaust valve closes, independent of the intake valve timing. This is a more efficient approach and works well at the lower rev ranges in which cars operate. Unfortunately for high-revving sports bikes where the amount of time between each ignition is short, the challenge is getting the fuel and air to mix in the same way that they do with port injection, ensuring an even combustion. Kawasaki recently patented an idea to use dual injection. The illustrations show both an injector before the intake valve and one directly into the combustion chamber. This approach could exploit the benefits of each method and opens up the potential for the ECU to vary the amount of fuel supply to to each injector throughout the rev range. For example, the port injector could supply a lesser amount of fuel that gets evenly distributed, whereas the direct injector adds more oomph around the spark plug at the last second. The likelihood of direct injection on bikes seems high given the constant pressure to keep down emissions, and Honda also filed patents last year for a direct injection version of the parallel twin used on the Africa Twin. Whether it will take this dual injection form remains to be seen. Some car manufacturers have made it work, but Kawasaki would be the first for a motorcycle. I recently borrowed a Goldwing DCT Tour from Honda and was amazed to see that the center console contained an airbag. It's pretty rare to find one on a motorcycle owing to the fact that there's usually a fuel tank in that area. The Goldwing is a big old beast and the tank is partially located under the saddle, so that provides enough space to accommodate the airbag. But it looks like Honda has been investigating ways to fit them to smaller, more traditional types of motorcycle if this pattern is anything to go by. This design is far more compact, fitting around the steering column of a scooter in the illustrations provided. Where a driver airbag in a car typically shoots out from the center of the steering wheel, this system has a similar looking pad that will be located over the bar clamps. When triggered, a gas canister inflates the airbag that shoots up into the air, hopefully protecting the rider from a frontal impact. It's not a big stretch to imagine this being included on their bigger scooters, especially as they've already pulled it off with the Goldwing. In the same way that you can get a wireless charger for your phone, BMW have patented a similar idea for electric motorcycles using the side stand to make contact with the charger. Although it's not a great deal of effort to plug your electric motorcycle in every evening, it's quite easy to forget if you're in a rush. If you park your bike in the same spot every day, then this would make charging ever so slightly more convenient and also serves as a little visual reminder on the floor. Wireless charging usually takes longer than a traditional cable, but honestly, as long as the charging time is shorter than the gap between arriving home one day and going out the next morning, it really doesn't matter to me. It'd also be cool to see these in motorcycle parking bays. No need to make sure you have the right cable, just stick your side stand on it and top up the charge while you're in the office, for example. This one seems like it could make it to production because it's a relatively simple but clever idea that makes use of existing technologies. Although BMW don't yet have an electric motorcycle on the market, so they'd better take care of that first. So that's my roundup of the best patents so far in 2020. I'd love to hear what you make of them in the comments below. Which ones were your favourites and which do you reckon we'll actually see on the market? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're new here and you want to see more videos like this, hit subscribe and I'll catch you next time.